Wedneday.
In 2022, the Prime Minister supported calls for fair and fast compensation for 1950s women impacted by the changes to the state pension. And yet, just yesterday, his government rejected those same calls out of hand. Mr Speaker, is this what the Prime Minister meant when he promised to lead a government of change?
Mr Speaker, this is a serious issue. Between 2005 and 2007, there were, I think, a 28-month delay in letters to women born in the 1950s about changes to pension age. That was unacceptable, and it was right that the government apologised for that. In 2011, the former Chancellor, George Osborne, then accelerated those changes with very little notice. That equally was unacceptable, and Labour opposed it at the time. It is a serious issue. It's a complex issue. The research, as he knows, shows that 90% of those impacted knew about the changes that were taking place. And I'm afraid to say the taxpayer simply can't afford the tens of billions of pounds in compensation when the evidence does show that 90% of those impacted did know about it. That's because of the state of our economy.
Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Parliamentary Ombudsman concluded that an injustice was done to 1950s-born women. It ruled that they are owed compensation and that Parliament intervened to deliver justice. In my constituency of Liverpool, West Derby, I have more than 5,000 women affected. And alongside a great many members in this House, I believe these women are owed compensation for the injustice done to them at the hands of the state. So will the Prime Minister give members the opportunity to vote on whether they believe Waspi women are owed compensation?
Well, Mr Speaker, I've just set out the factual background and the percentage that knew about the change. And the simple fact of the matter is, in the current economic circumstances, the taxpayer can't bear the burden of tens of billions of pounds in compensation. Well, they're chuntering away. In 14 years, they accelerated the changes and not once spoke about compensation.
Doogan.
Mr Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with Waspi women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
They used to ask those questions. They used to ask those questions from this sort of area with very many MPs not so long ago. That all changed in July, and he's now carping from right up there. We can hardly hear him.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
The Waspi women fought one of the most sustained and passionate campaigns for justice that I can remember, year in, year out. We did promise them that we would give them justice. I understand the issue about the cost, but does the Prime Minister really understand how let down Waspi women feel today?
I do understand the concern, of course I do. I set out the history, Mr Speaker, but the research is clear that 90% of those impacted did know about the change. And in those circumstances, the taxpayer simply can't afford the burden of tens of billions of pounds of compensation. But I do understand the concerns.